Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you may be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Wednesday, April 14th, 2021. Before I start with my first subject, which is the world just doesn't love Justin Trudeau anymore, I'll just give you an update on the collapse of civilization in my own little corner of the world. I was out on my balcony at about 10 o'clock last night, and I heard a woman shout, "No, no, no, you're not supposed to do that." And I turned my head to the right, and it was a female security guard who was shouting at someone some distance in front of her. So I turned my head to the left, and there was a woman, 30-something, I suppose, and she was wearing just a jacket, no pants, no skirt, and the jacket was quite short. It went down to just past her mons veneris, and I noticed that she had her panties around her ankles, and she was bent forward and urinating against a wall. And when she was finished, she pulled her panties back up, and she walked into the homeless shelter, formerly Paul's Motor Inn, across the street. Like she couldn't have relieved herself indoors is an interesting question. Perhaps she was marking territory. Hello to Don from Beyond, Dan, Head, McNack, Tricky Who, and William Hicks. So I'm going to read from a bunch of stories from the postmillennial.com, and they're all from this source, because Canada's mainstream media doesn't seem to be interested in the story that the world doesn't love Justin Trudeau anymore. In fact, I searched Canada News Watch, which is kind of the Canadian Drudge. I searched, didn't find any stories on this. And I even did a search, Control F for Trudeau and for vaccine. No, nada, nothing. I guess it's too embarrassing. Trudeau blasted by British media after claiming UK facing very serious third wave. The UK has fully vaccinated 7.8 million people, or 11% of its population, while Canada has administered jabs to only 716,000 citizens, a mere 0.01% overall. This claim, the third wave claim, is being called false by some in the United Kingdom. Trudeau made the statements in Parliament after he was criticized by the opposition Conservatives for damaging Canada's international reputation amid negative media coverage from the likes of both CNN and Fox News. Trudeau said that it was important to work from facts and understanding of the science around things, saying that the UK was ahead of just about everybody else of vaccinations, and yet they maintain very strong restrictions and are facing a very serious third wave. Vaccinations on their own are not enough to keep us safe. We need to engage in the right kinds of behaviors, do things that conservatives aren't always good at, like wearing masks, keeping distances, and obeying public health rules. Trudeau continued. Okay, so vaccinations on their own are not enough to keep us safe. That is not what Justin Trudeau said last year. Perhaps at the time that he said it, no one in the country, or certainly not him, had no idea what a disaster Canada's vaccine rollout would be. Canada was going to get vaccines from China, of all places, and we know, with looking at Chile, just how crummy these Chinese vaccines are. And the media, the people, leftists in Canada, are blaming Stephen Harper and Brian Mulroney for this. And apparently there's no vaccine capacity in Canada, which is absolutely false. James Ball tweeted, UK is down to 20,000 cases a week. Cases are still falling week on week. So has Trudeau just invented a third wave here? Or within the last 24 hours, the UK has had just over 2,400 cases and 23 deaths, while Canada has had 7,548 cases and 36 deaths. The UK population is not quite twice as large. Let's say it's 80% larger than Canada's. Scientists in the UK have said that while more people will die from COVID in the coming days and weeks, any potential wave would be relatively restricted. This is because the mass majority of the vulnerable population has been vaccinated, which is untrue of Canada's population. Yes, also because it is now April the 14th, and we are heading into quite warm weather in both Canada and in the United Kingdom. And it would be unusual, to say the least, to see a surge of a respiratory disease in late spring and summer. As such, according to PM, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has moved forward with easing restrictions. Pubs, gyms, salons, zoos, and restaurants are all reopening their doors. The Prime Minister added that it was an inevitability that more infections and deaths would come, but that people have just got to understand that. Provinces across Canada have shut down in-person classes for students and other restrictions, including curfews. Yes, the schools have been closed in Ontario, and there is a curfew, a daily curfew, in effect in the province of Quebec. This, again, from the Post-Millennial. Trudeau says he has no regrets over Canada's vaccine rollout and procurement. And his finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, talked about what a great opportunity COVID-19 presented to Canada. Canada currently ranks at 45th in COVID vaccine doses administered per 100 people. Also, the per capita rate of COVID is now higher in Canada than it is in the United States, which means that all those smug Canadians sneering at the Americans for their ignorance are going to have to find some other reason to sneer. When asked directly if there was anything in retrospect that the Prime Minister would consider a mistake or he wishes that he'd acted on earlier on, Trudeau responded, no, not in terms of our vaccine rollout. Obviously, we worked extremely hard from last summer onwards to sign many different contracts with different potential vaccine makers around the world. And we were among the first countries to start getting approved vaccines into arms back in December. It's not really answering the question, is it? The Prime Minister said that in general, the vaccines have arrived in Canada despite production delays. I think it's important to remember the vaccination alone. Yes, we heard that already. Trudeau said that in order to ease restrictions, that more vaccines needed to be administered and that caseloads decreased. He really is a child, an absolute child. CNN's Jake Tapper noted that Canada now outpaces the United States in new COVID cases per capita, saying that the Canadian vaccine rollout is not going well at all. Tapper points out that 1 in 3 Americans have gotten their first shot in the U.S., whereas in Canada that number sits at fewer than 1 in 5. So Trudeau is being blasted from both sides of the aisle. Tucker Carlson slams Justin Trudeau for saying vaccinations are not enough to keep us safe. Carlson played a clip on his show wherein Trudeau says, yes, we've heard that already. The Conservatives aren't always good at wearing masks, keeping distances, and obeying public health rules. Carlson said the leader of Canada just explained on television that according to the science, the vaccine doesn't stop COVID, adding the shot cannot be simultaneously effective but not restore people's lives to normal. That doesn't make sense. They didn't tell you to avoid water fountains after getting the polio vaccine. They don't need to tell you that because the polio vaccine works. Carlson stated that there is a legitimate public health mystery here at the very heart of the most aggressive vaccination campaign in the history of the country. He decried a journalist's lack of coverage on the issue. Isn't that their job? No, their job is to carry water for Joe Biden in the United States and for Justin Trudeau in Canada. I think that the journalists' embrace of Joe Biden has been somewhat reluctant. Well, obviously so. I mean, he's not orange, bad man, That's the only thing that matters. Whereas in Canada, when Trudeau first appeared on the scene, and especially when he ran first for prime minister in 2015, the media was simply consumed with a psychosexual obsession with the man, and I'm talking about both female and male journalists. It was embarrassing to see. Again, from the post-millennial, CNN anchor Jake Tapper has challenged Justin Trudeau over his apparent claim that the American broadcaster did not work with the facts when they reported on his abysmal handling of vaccines. When the Conservative leader Erin O'Toole raised Tapper's reporting in Canada's House of Commons, Trudeau responded by saying, "It's really important that we work from facts." Tapper tweeted on Tuesday that he agrees, and then went on to ask, what are the facts about Canada's vaccine acquisition and rollout? He went on to ask, what facts in this Paula Newton piece does Justin Trudeau dispute? Charles Adler, who wasn't always so critical of the Prime Minister, said that the Prime Minister over the weekend said Liberals can always do better. This was a good day to test that proposition. Someone failed. Andrew Lawton tweeted, Justin Trudeau defends his government's poor vaccine rollout by saying vaccines aren't enough to end mask mandates and social distancing restrictions. Then what's the point? Throughout the week, American media is continuing to shred Trudeau's pandemic response, calling his governance woeful. In a recent article by Forbes, the journalist proceeds to write that Trudeau's COVID hotels have failed, that the vaccination program has been woeful, and that Canadians are becoming jealous of Americans. I'm not so sure. After a whole year, again, of sneering at the Americans, oh, we're so much better than them, it's difficult. It's almost impossible for most people, particularly people in responsible positions, to say, I made a mistake. I made a big mistake. What I told you was wrong. I should think that in a lot of other countries in the world, if the media and the elite weren't running, opposite, they weren't blocking for Justin Trudeau, he would have been forced to resign right now. Senator Linda Frum, who, by the way, is David Frum's sister, described the article as revealing a degree of alarm that our U.S. neighbors have about Canada's woeful level of vaccinations. This, however, is not the only scathing media report that Americans have made about Canada. The unapologetically left-wing CNN told their viewers this week that Canada's vaccination rollout has been a real failure by the Trudeau government. Oh, also, The Atlantic magazine has decided to rip Trudeau as well. And a final story from the post-millennial. Yes, woeful. But Trudeau has survived any number of scandals, including ones involving him personally, once again, because what's the Canadian media going to say? That Justin Trudeau is a dullard, that he is an overgrown child, that the only reason that he is an MP, let alone prime minister, is because of his Q factor, that people recognize the name Trudeau. Oh, here's some panic porn from the Windsor Star. Surging like absolute crazy. Ontario hospitals pray they don't reach last resort stage in third wave. Last resort stage. Well, you think this was, what is this? Canada's Leningrad in 1942? Is that what we're supposed to believe? The idea of people being removed from intensive care, unhooked from ventilators that might have saved them to make room for someone else more likely to survive, is almost unfathomable, says the president and CEO of Canada's largest university hospital. I believe we'll fight that one as long as humanly possible, and I pray we never get to the point of having to consider that, said Dr. Kevin Smith, head of Toronto's University Health Network and co-chair of Ontario's COVID-19 Critical Care Table. Staged withdrawals of life support from people with low chance of survival are not part of a 32-page emergency triage protocol that would be enacted should Ontario's ICUs become saturated. You see, they're talking about this, and what they're talking about is euthanasia. Euthanasia is legal in this country, or physician-assisted murder, as I prefer to call it. And courts have decided, no, not enough people are eligible to be murdered by doctors. So Parliament has decided yes, let's just start allowing people who are depressed to be murdered by doctors. But given already existing economic conditions in Canada, and given Canada's effectively bankrupt now, and they're going to be looking for ways to save money. And one of the ways they're going to be saving money is by killing old people. That way they don't have to pay their pensions any longer. And they don't have to pay for their health care. Trudeau says Canada is closely monitoring Johnson & Johnson vaccine pause in the United States. The only thing that Justin Trudeau is capable of closely monitoring is the length of his beard. This is from Gabby Rodriguez at Global News. Scarborough Health Network says 2 of its mass vaccination clinics are closed due to lack of COVID-19 vaccine supply, forcing the cancellation of about 10,000 appointments. The closure is effective from April the 14th through to Monday, April the 19th. Scarborough continues to struggle with the incomprehensible disparity in vaccine distribution for Canada's most diverse community, as if that makes any difference, and one of Ontario's most severe hotspots, said Maureen Adamson, a chair of Scarborough Hospital Network's board. Scarborough is the backbone of Toronto, Adamson continued. Our people are the essential workers that keep Ontario running. Our hospitals are seeing the highest rate of COVID-19 admissions throughout this pandemic, and the positivity rate in Scarborough has reached 24%, which only underpins the need for a serious ramp up in vaccinations. So where are the vaccines? Yes. AstraZeneca, very safe, effective, with extremely rare risk of clots, according to Health Canada. And just coming to the end of this, most Canadians say type of COVID-19 vaccine instrumental in whether or not they get it. That is interesting. So apparently Canadians are paying attention and know that there are significant differences and risks associated with the different types of vaccines, some of which are not, well, most of which are not vaccines as commonly understood. Let's go to the chat. Hello to G's Heat Stall. Please make sure you renew your air freshener licenses. What was the name of the Canadian drudge? Asked G's Heat Stall. National. Well, let me just call it up here. So it's just muscle memory thing. Nationalnewswatch.com. Oh, here's a breaking story. 1 million vaccines in freezers. Ontario defends buffer as thousands of appointments canceled. Feds plan to push ahead with Johnson & Johnson vaccine procurement despite U.S. pause. Okay. Dan says, never let a good crisis go to waste. Jim Smith says, Kevin, how does Trudeau compare to Biden? Well, Trudeau does make appearances, although he pretty much vanished at the start of COVID. He separated from his wife and children for weeks and weeks and weeks. Very odd. Lots of rumors about that. And would show up in front of a podium. A few softballs would be tossed at him, and then he would return indoors. Oh, and he grew a beard. I suppose, before the senility hit, Biden was a much cleverer person than Justin Trudeau. But that's not saying very much at all. Justin Trudeau is so dim-witted that he was talking about diversity, talking about the virtues of diversity, and he used the word entropy. Yeah, diversity leads to entropy, which according to Trudeau is a good thing. Trudeau also did not know the difference between the Balkans and the Baltics when he was asked a question, sort of mild, humorous question, what's your favorite one of the Baltics? He said, that's not a thing. Gamion says Biden's plastic surgeries did a hell of a job. He looks youthful. He has the Joker look, though. I mean, when he smiles, it looks demonic. Chogokin666 says, I'm starting to reach an event horizon with this country. I think I can get Italian citizenship. GC Style says, Canada forced the delays upon Trudeau. They'll make him understand several times over that acting upon the Huawei CEO is unacceptable to them. Hello to Professor Paul. I understand that if you have at least 2 grandparents that originate there, you may be eligible. Plus, I have living relatives there. Says Chogokin 666. Leningrad or Stalingrad? No, I was thinking of the siege of Leningrad, which went on for a very, very long time. Gamion says, I heard something similar about England. You should definitely explore that. I did explore it back in the 1980s. My mother was born in Wales. So I did all the paperwork to get residency in Britain, which would also entitle me to residency in the European Union at that time. And then at the last minute, I decided that I was just going to stay in my home country. Steve says Leningrad was under siege, never taken. Stalingrad, there was fighting inside the city itself. Killing old people, that's what COVID is for, says a Texas feral hog. Well, that's certainly how it is worked out in my country with the care workers in the old age homes fleeing in terror after they'd managed to infect pretty much everyone in them. ContraQ says it will be interesting to see if the Sanofi GSK C19 vaccine is approved later this year. It is a more traditional vaccine that doesn't use any of these mRNA platforms. There's also, of course, the Russian vaccine, the Sputnik, which they claim doesn't have the problems that others have. It certainly has more testing behind it. MF Superstar says entropy could be malaprop for empathy. Yeah, I don't know. Most people don't know what empathy means. It means putting yourself in another man's shoes. It does not mean sympathy, which is quite a different thing. So, one more for the post-millennial. And Aaron O'Toole, quoted earlier, who is determined to show just how progressive he is, despite the fact that he won the conservative leadership solely because social conservatives backed him. Social conservatives are among the stupidest people in Canada. Oh, yes, I support your social conservatism. And then when they get elected leader, it's piss off or else. And yeah, I'm going to start throwing people out of the party. But you said you were a social conservative. I may have said this before, but here's my parable of the social conservative. A man was observed in a public square bashing his head against the wall. Sometime later, the man who'd observed him saw him there in the same place, and he was still bashing his head against the wall. And he went up to him and he said, "Why do you continue to hurt yourself in this way?" And the man replied, "What, and let them win?" Aaron O'Toole tweeted today, "It is unfair and discriminatory that gay men are unable to donate blood in 2021. Canada is in desperate need of blood donation, so it's wrong that we turn away good people because of their sexuality." He's not quite right about this, what he said. O'Toole's response came after openly gay Conservative MP Eric Duncan released a video telling his story and proponing his campaign to end the blood ban. Gay and bisexual men were outright banned from donating blood between 1992 and 2013 after nearly 1,100 Canadians receiving blood transfusions were infected with HIV. Another 20,000 were infected with hepatitis C as screening methods for the virus were limited. Canada's policy on gay and bisexual blood donations have changed since then. However, with the Harper government shifting to allow donations from those who have not had sex with men in 5 years. And how would you know whether these would-be blood donors had not had sex with men in 5 years? I suppose that's what they told you. And of course, men have never been known to lie about that sort of thing. The last time homosexuals were allowed to give blood, it led to one of the greatest scandals in Canadian history, where our blood supply was thoroughly polluted. And the Red Cross, which was in charge of blood donations in Canada, had a dilemma that it had bought blood from the United States, which was certified not polluted. And they, instead of using that, they decided, well, we have all this polluted blood, so why don't we just use up all the stocks of that? No one was ever tried for this, but that is very much the Canadian way, that no one is ever held responsible for any disaster. And a final story about Canada. This is from Karen Jelena in The Conversation. Sexual conduct, abuse of power, adultery, and secrecy, what I witnessed in Canada's military. As a female veteran observing reports of sexual misconduct among senior Canadian Armed Forces officers, I've been forced to make sense of my own experience. Over the years, I witnessed firsthand the culture of secrecy and adultery that isn't spoken of outside military circles. Everyone knows it happens, yet everyone remains quiet. The no fraternization policy is treated as a suggestion and rarely enforced. It is widely understood that what happens in deployment, exercise, or training stays there. Both women and men participate in these behaviors. It feels as though it's widely accepted, so much so that it borders on being encouraged. The accepted sexual behaviors in the forces can have severe consequences beyond harassment, and like everyone else, I went along with it. I entered a pact of secrecy and became part of the problem by being a bystander. When I was a new junior officer, I filed my first complaint of misconduct, which led to 5 other individuals coming forward. As punishment, the person the complaints were against was asked to write an apology letter. Years later, he bragged about the paper trail being removed before his posting. I took this information up my change of command and was told that it was in the past. Despite this misconduct reoccurring with other members, nothing was ever done. That instance made me lose faith in the system. I never filed another complaint of misconduct again, and I kept telling myself that it was either not bad enough, or I could handle it, or I would deem it okay. It was the alcohol. I'd become a prisoner of the psychic prison. Well, you know, lots of people, including me, warned that when women were admitted into the Canadian military, it would mean that the rules against fraternization would be thrown out the window, and people like me were mocked soundly. Oh yes, it's always the worst with you people, isn't it? Well, a famous general who asked not to be quoted in this, what he said, this particular thing, said, we have enough trouble with the soldiers sleeping with each other without bringing women into it. Obviously, this was going to lead to adultery and fornication and fraternization, just going off the scale. But I suppose, you know, what's really important in this is that Canada's military has no purpose. It certainly doesn't exist to defend Canada. It's a social laboratory and a pipeline for PTSD and sexual harassment cases. It has no practical value. So, you know, if you were to bring up similar conditions in countries like, oh, I don't know, the United States or Russia, this would be a serious issue. In Canada, it's just part of the clown show that my country has become. And here's some good news. But I have to say, remember what I was saying earlier about people not being willing to admit that they made a mistake, a big mistake? Now keep that in mind. This is from William Briggs, statistician to the stars, who posts at wmbriggs.com. Masks do not work. The paper is Face Masks in the COVID-19 Era, a Health Hypothesis in Medical Hypothesis by Baruch Vain-Schalbaum. I'm thrilled to say this beats me to the punch on the mask reality paper I've been working on. Let's begin at the conclusion. The data suggests that both medical and non-medical face masks are ineffective to block human-to-human transmission of viral and infectious disease, such as SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19, supporting against the usage of face masks. Wearing face masks has been demonstrated to have substantial adverse physiological and psychological effects. These include hypoxia, hypercapnia, shortness of breath, increased acidity and toxicity, activation of fear and stress response, rise in stress hormones, immunosuppression, fatigue, headaches, decline in cognitive performance, predisposition for viral and infectious illnesses, chronic stress, anxiety, and depression. Long-term consequences of wearing face masks can cause health deterioration, developing and progression of chronic diseases, and premature death. Governments, policymakers, and health organizations should utilize proper and scientific evidence-based approach with respect to wearing face masks when the latter is considered as a preventative intervention for public health. Briggs comments, do us all a favor, will you? Send this paper, which is linked to on Briggs's blog, if you live in a medical, to your ruler, if you live in a medical tyranny locale. They won't acknowledge the results, of course, because rulers are loath to admit error. The bigger the mistake, the more it is not their fault. But perhaps it will help forestall or block mask criminalization next time, for there will be a next time. As I've told you hundreds of times, we get pandemics every 10 to 20 years. This is our first global panic, though. Since we proved to our rulers how cowardly we all are, they'll surely try to grab more power next time. This paper can help lessen that. The paper proves each of the contentions in the conclusion. It is a review paper examining the evidence from dozens of meta-analyses and other papers. Recall that if you can't prove your hypothesis with a wee p-value in a single paper, you can always up the n, which guarantees weir p's, by doing a meta-analysis. If you can't get a wee p there, well, what you're trying to prove just can't be done. Masks just don't work. Here are a list of demonstrated ill effects of prolonged mask usage. And I'm going to read the entire list. Hypoxia, hypercapnia, shortness of breath, increase of lactate concentration, decline in pH levels, acidosis, toxicity, inflammation, self-contamination, increase in stress hormone level, adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol, increased muscle tension, immunosuppression, activate of fight or flight stress response, chronic stress condition, fear, mood disturbances, insomnia, fatigue, compromised cognitive performance, increased predisposition for viral and infection illnesses, headaches, anxiety, depression, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, exacerbation of existing conditions and diseases, accelerated aging process, health deterioration, premature mortality. That is quite the laundry list of contraindications, wouldn't you say? Briggs comments, but Briggs, you science denier, what about surgeons? Surgeons wear and frequently change special masks so they don't snot into patients and so they don't get splattered with blood. Contagious surgeons don't operate on patients. This paper is eminently readable. If you can read this blog, you can surely read it. So click on over and prove to yourself that masks don't work. Meanwhile, here are some key quotes. Interestingly, 99% of the detected cases with SARS-CoV-2 are asymptomatic or have mild condition, which contradicts with the virus name, severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2. The overall clinical consequences of COVID-19 are similar to those of severe seasonal influenza, having a true case fatality rate of approximately 0.1%. Due to the difference in sizes between SARS-CoV-2 diameter and face mask's thread diameter, the virus is 1,000 times smaller. SARS-CoV-2 can easily pass through any face mask. Among symptomatic individuals, those with fever, cough, sore throat, runny nose, etc., there was no difference between wearing and not wearing face masks for coronavirus droplets transmission, suggesting that asymptomatic individuals do not transmit or infect other people. A meta-analysis among healthcare workers found that compared to no masks, surgical masks and N95 respirators were not effective against transmission of viral infections or influenza-like illness based on 6 RCTs. Based on 4 COVID-19 studies, the meta-analysis failed to demonstrate risk reduction of face masks for COVID-19 transmission. In early publication, the World Health Organization stated that face masks are not required, as no evidence is available on its usefulness to protect non-sick persons. In the same publication, the WHO declared that cloth, e.g. cotton or gauze masks, are not recommended under any circumstances. The WHO repeatedly announced that at present there is no direct evidence from studies on COVID-19 on the effectiveness of face masking of healthy people in the community to prevent infection of respiratory viruses. In addition to hypoxia and hypercapnia, breathing through face mask residues, bacterial and germs components on the inner and outside layer of the face mask. These toxic components are repeatedly rebreathed into the body, causing self-contamination. The adverse physiological effects were confirmed in a study of 53 surgeons where surgical face masks were used during a major operation. Wearing face masks causing hypoxic and hypercapnic state that constantly challenges the normal homeostasis and activates fight or flight stress response, an important survival mechanism in the human body. Encountering people who are wearing face masks activates innate stress-fear emotion, which is fundamental to all humans in danger or life-threatening situation. Global estimates showing that COVID-19 will cause a catastrophe due to collateral psychological damage, such as quarantine, lockdowns, unemployment, economic collapse, social isolation, violence, and suicides. Briggs comments, those are just the juicy ones. I left off tons of other studies, including the ones such as the recent Danish mask study that we did earlier. Most, when confronted again and again and again with evidence masks don't work, will still not believe it. Just like the person wearing garlic around their throat, they know masks work. After all, they haven't been bitten. Since rules are derived by the fears of our most cowardly, rulers won't let go of mask mandates easily. Masks are magic to most. Meanwhile, the Dutch police are so convinced of the usefulness of masks, they often give out helpful reminders to citizens. And there is a video attached, April the 10th, which shows Dutch policemen or members of the army dressed up as if they are going into combat. And there are two young women not wearing masks, and they get pushed repeatedly by the shields and battered with batons for not wearing masks. Briggs continues, even the New York Times is admitting in rare cases the AstraZeneca COVID vaccine has led to severe and sometimes fatal blood clots. Newly published research from Germany and Norway describes a powerful immune reaction that may be the cause. Hilariously, they say exactly why the rare reactions to the vaccine occurred is still a mystery. We see below again that young people have a very, very small risk of COVID death or disease. Taking the AstraZeneca vaccine may even present a higher risk of both. But hey, vaccines are mandatory in many places. Interestingly, imagine how bad it really is if this is what the New York Times is reporting. The Centers for Disease Control is sticking with its 6% COVID-only deaths. Among 378,000 death certificates from 2020 listing COVID-19, 5.5% listed COVID-19 without codes for any other conditions. Among 357,000 death certificates with at least one other condition, 97% had a co-occurring diagnosis of a plausible chain of event condition, e.g. pneumonia or respiratory failure, or a significant contributing condition, e.g. hypertension or diabetes, or both. Also, outdoor transmission accounts for 0.1% of the state's COVID-19 cases. How about that? Recall, if you don't have this by heart by now, that cases is a false metric. It means positive test of any kind, a weak criterion. Nothing experts said to justify medical tyranny turned out to be true. No thing. But the media and the elite has become addicted to panic, to scaring people to death. And now the latrine wallahs, who were praised to the skies, considered living saints, are under attack because they didn't completely shut down the whole of society and the economy. They have adopted the zero COVID model, which would truly lead to entropy, which is not a good thing, despite what Justin Trudeau might believe. Let's look at the chat. Again, Gamian says, I've heard nothing bad about Sputnik yet. Contra-Coup says, yes, Russia and China both use traditional vaccines. Contra-Coup says, makes you wonder why we can't do the same. Well, my understanding is that there are some people, particularly in big pharma, who believe that mRNA is the future of medicine, that your body is going to be repairing itself, that, maybe we can even cure cancer that way. Now, it seems obvious to me that a vaccination, which is, again, not a traditional vaccination, which makes such profound changes to the body that the effects of it are not going to be known for quite some time. But warp speed. What else? Oh, Chogakin666 likes my flags of the American Revolution tie. Quite fond of it myself. Putting oneself in another's shoes seems like something Trudeau would do, especially if costumes are involved, says G's His style. Yes, indeed. Indeed. Getting residency in another country, you'll need birth and death certificates, marriage certificates help too. Yes, a lot of paperwork was required, and much of it was difficult to get a hold of. What my baptism record, I believe, was required for some reason. What else do we have here? What story is Kevin reading on masks? It's from William Briggs's blog, which I highly recommend to all of you. He doesn't just write about COVID. He writes about other things, including religion. It's at WMBriggs, BRIGGS.com. MF Superstar says masks are about unity now, that we're all in this together thing. My local newspaper, the Victoria Times Colonist, which I do not read, it's the Times Colonist, and they've taken to putting a heart between the Times and the Colonist. I thought that sort of thing had died out, last summer, around the time of our generic national holiday day. People were reproducing the Canadian flag with the maple leaf replaced with a big red heart. Because we're all in this together, except for people who are non-essential, who are very much not all in this together. MF Superstar says elites want C-19 collective experience as equivalent of war. Too true. And wearing masks or otherwise conforming with restriction signals we're all doing our part. Jokin 666 says throat has been itching, causing cough, which I believe is either pollen or fibers from masking. Yes, I finally washed my mask yesterday because it occurred to me that I'd been wearing it since August, and it was probably, not doing me much good, to put it mildly. MF Superstar says, wonder what Wyndham Lewis would say about the COVID hysteria. I know exactly what he would say, because I'm extensively read in his works, both fiction and nonfiction. He talked about this, the feminization of society, that women reacting with disgust to the smell of of sweat and cigarette smoke. That no, women are in charge now. It's that simple. Frothing Fanboy says, where is it proved that such and such a virus causes any illness whatsoever? That any virus happens to be found in a person with certain symptoms proves nothing. Well, going back 13 months, I made pretty much the same point. The Epstein-Barr virus, which causes mononucleosis and is associated with a made-up disease called chronic fatigue syndrome, is contained in the bodies of 95% of Americans above the age of 15. So if it were posited that Epstein-Barr virus was deadly, then 95% of all deaths could be blamed on Epstein-Barr. Latest Project Veritas sting has CNN guys saying they do intentionally fearmonger to push their agenda. That's from MF Superstar. Hikma Warrior says wearing mask for more than 10 minutes makes me nauseous. It induces in me, well, yes, the fight or flight. Yes, panic. I start feeling panic, and I start to get this feeling that I'm being poisoned from the re-ingestion of carbon dioxide, which is supposed to be expelled from the mouth. Wyndham Lewis predicted woke capital, says Steve. Yes, an old joke from Buddy. Kevin, before criticizing someone, walk a mile in their shoes. That way you're a mile away, and now you have their shoes. Okay. Oh, Mick Jagger has weighed in on COVID-19. I remember a joke from the David Mamet movie Heist, where Gene Hackman says, nobody lives forever. And Rebecca Pidgeon replies, Sinatra gave it a shot. And Mick Jagger seems to be giving it a shot. He is 77 years old, and he seems to have more energy than people half or a quarter of his age. He plays guitar and sings, and Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters does everything else. He says he complains about being pushed around by pricks, but also, yes, the numbers are so grim. So a rather mixed message from Mick. Mick Jagger's become a pretty good electric guitar player, I have to say. Some people say that he's a better guitar player now than either Keith Richards or Ron Wood. I don't know, perhaps because he practices. That might have something to do with it. Let's go to lockdown skeptics. Physical inactivity doubles risks of COVID death, study suggests. Oh, it just gets worse and worse. You can't go outside, but what am I supposed to do? Well, I suppose you could get Amazon to deliver a treadmill to you or some such. Hospitality leaders tell Boris Johnson they will not force customers to show vaccine passports. EU Commission to end AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson vaccine contracts at expiry. Well, isn't this just like the tainted blood that I talked about earlier? If they think that these substances are harmful, why don't they just throw them away now? Boris is wrong. The lockdown has not been overwhelmingly important. Yesterday, the Prime Minister said that the reduction in cases, hospitalizations, and deaths has not been achieved by the vaccination program. Rather, he claimed it's the lockdown that has been overwhelmingly important in delivering this improvement in the pandemic and in the figures that we're seeing. While the lockdown may have had some impact on the epidemic's trajectory, we should be very skeptical of the Prime Minister's claim. First, as Will Jones pointed out yesterday in Lockdown Skeptics, there are several U.S. states where numbers fell dramatically in the absence of any lockdown. Florida, Texas, Georgia, South Dakota, South Carolina, and Mississippi. And to this list, one could add Sweden. As shown below, the trajectory of deaths per million in Sweden is strikingly similar to that in the UK, even though that country has never gone into lockdown. It should be noted, of course, that measures not based on age-adjusted excess mortality can be misleading. Second, the most convincing study of the UK's lockdowns, of which I am aware, writes Will Jones, now published in Biometrics, concludes that each one was introduced only after the corresponding peak of fatal infections. In particular, the statistician Simon Woods sought to reconstruct the actual time course of infections in England based on available data. He noted that reported case numbers are subject to various forms of bias, e.g. non-representative samples, changes in the amount of type and testing, and that under normal circumstances, statisticians would not recommend attempting to estimate the effective reproduction number of the pathogen from such data. Yeah, the data is rubbish, but we'll just use it anyway, and then we will enforce profound and destructive dictates, because that's what the rubbish data requires. Oh, do you know that we have underground churches in Canada now? Have you heard about that? Apparently it's real. Christian leaders warn against the introduction of medical apartheid under a vaccine passport scheme. How many COVID deaths are really due to COVID-19? The Telegraph's front page led today with a story that nearly a quarter of deaths, 23%, registered with COVID in the latest official data for England and Wales were not due to COVID, but were due to another underlying cause, according to the information entered on the death certificate. This percentage is up on earlier figures. However, there is a good reason to believe that both figures are too low. A Freedom of Information inquiry found that for Northern Ireland, the proportion of deaths that mentioned COVID but identified an antecedent condition or conditions as the cause of death for the period March 1 to November 20th was 38%. Weimar Court prohibits mask wearing, distancing measures, and rapid testing in schools. A court in Weimar, Germany, has ruled that 2 schools should be prevented with immediate effect from forcing their pupils to wear masks, along with imposing social distancing measures and insisting on SARS-CoV-2 rapid tests. Yes, it's as if we decided last year that the youngest generation is not disturbed enough, that we need to put the fear of God into them. Well, not God exactly, because that's frowned upon in the West now, but just the fear of life, essentially. Children, traditionally in the past, were not weighed down by the weight of the world, but we've decided in our wisdom that children must be weighed down with all of the ills of the world, because it's not fair that they don't worry about everything, that they're not miserable all the time as adults so frequently are. And I'm going to wrap up this subject by returning, as always, to Alex Berenson's invaluable Twitter feed. I wonder if Nate Silver, Matt Gertz, and other fools who said that the FDA had overreacted in suspending the Johnson & Johnson vaccine will admit they were wrong, now that the committee that was supposed to provide cover to end the suspension has looked at the risks and refused to play along. Probably not. Twitter means never having to say you're sorry. Doesn't change the fact that the cases are real, deadly, and occurring far more often than the 1 in 1 million figure the vaccine church parrots. Someone called Anjali Kamlani had tweeted something about Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Berenson comments, let me translate this. Johnson & Johnson vaccine remains indefinitely suspended. Return currently scheduled for the 12th of never. Kavita Patel, MD, tweeted, meeting is definitely going in a direction I did not predict. It seems like people are very hesitant to lift the pause until we have more information. And Berenson says, good. They are scared of what's happened in Europe, and they should be. And another report about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Someone had written to Berenson, Alex, thank you so much for all you've been doing to shed light on this COVID vaccine issue. It is so important for people to understand the full picture in order to make the best decision for themselves. My husband and I are both medical professionals and advocates for informed consent. Yesterday evening, the issue hit home for us as my 36-year-old female cousin had emergency surgery to evacuate multiple clots to the veins in her brain. She had the Johnson & Johnson vaccine about 10 days ago and developed a severe headache a few days later. When her head pain was severe and unrelenting, she finally saw her family medicine doctor, who ordered an MRI yesterday after seeing the news that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine had been paused. The MRI revealed numerous clots in her brain, and she was immediately sent to a large hospital for surgery. So far, she does not seem to have any neurologic symptoms post-operatively, thank goodness. She's a married mom to 2 boys and extremely healthy and active. Just wanted someone to know her story. Please continue to fight the good fight. We all appreciate you so much. Berenson comments in this email shows why the FDA was ethically bound to make sure everyone knows the potential dangers. People are at risk. This woman might have died if her physician hadn't ordered an MRI. I guess the vaccine church would call that a fair price to avoid vaccine hesitancy. And let's do an update on peaceful protests in the United States. This is from the U.S. Sun. Night of Rage. Dante Wright rioters burned down police building and forced cop Kimberly Potter to flee her home after address leaked. Well, this demonstrates to me that Derek Chauvin is not going to get a fair trial. Look, the jurors are going to find out about this, and they are going to realize that if they vote not to convict Chauvin, their names and addresses are going to be leaked to Antifa. It's that simple. So in terror, I'm now convinced that they will vote to convict him regardless of the evidence. A third night of riots erupted following the death of Dante Wright that led to protesters burning down a police building and forcing a cop to flee her home after her address leaked. More than 60 people were arrested in Portland, Minneapolis, New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago amid the growing unrest throughout the country after 25-year veteran officer Kim Potter shot and killed Wright during a traffic stop Sunday. And protesters also descended on the home of Officer Kim Potter, who shot Wright 20 after allegedly mistaking her gun for a taser. The 25-year veteran's home was barricaded on Tuesday night as crowds gathered outside her 5-bedroom house. Potter and her husband, a former Fridley police officer, fled the residence after the address was shared on social media. A riot was declared in Portland for the second consecutive night after the police union headquarters in North Portland was swarmed by about 100 people and set on fire. Smoke engulfed the street as the flames erupted next to the letters ACAB, spray painted on the building, meaning all cops are bastards. Scores of protesters in Brooklyn Center last night lobbed bottles and other projectiles over a fence in front of police headquarters as chaos erupted outside the police station. Demonstrators used umbrellas, the tops of storage units, and boogie boards as makeshift shields against cops to deflect tear gas, flash bombs, and other non-lethal weapons. Police declared an unlawful assembly at the drastically reinforced Brooklyn Center Police Station as riot cops and the National Guard shielded the building, which is now enclosed by concrete barriers and metal fencing. Murderopolis was spray painted on one of the barriers just a stone's throw from where George Floyd was killed last May and where Officer Derek Chauvin is currently on trial regarding his death. Now, there may have been other black men who died in police custody in the Minneapolis region, but it seems like that we had one last year and one this year. This does not seem to me to be any kind of attempted genocide, although I'm sure others will disagree. And what do we get from the Mail? Officer to be charged today. Yes, charged with second-degree manslaughter. The officer, Potter, already resigned. And I don't know. I'm not expecting a fair trial for this woman either. I mean, the lesson here is obvious. Police officers don't get involved with black people anymore. Whatever they're doing, whether it's driving without insurance, driving with an expired license, driving with broken headlamps or signals, speeding, just let them go. Just let it go. I mean, how high up the list of offenses? Theft, robbery, rape, murder. It is more than your job's worth, and perhaps more than your life's worth, to now, in America, arrest black people. It's that simple. We've seen that the murder rate, that is to say blacks killing blacks, has exploded because of Black Lives Matter. And we can only expect this to get worse. From the Citizen Free Press, police erect fence around Kim Potter's house. Law enforcement on Tuesday erected concrete barricades and tall metal fencing around the entire perimeter of Kim Potter's multi-level home in Champlain. 2 police cars guard the driveway behind fortified fences marked with signs reading "Caution, lasers in use." I don't know what the lasers are for. Perhaps someone in the chat can enlighten me. Again, from the Citizen Free Press, racist photo of the day. And I'm presuming that this is in Minneapolis or that suburb, Brooklyn Station. There is a building which has a very large sign over its front entrance which says, "Racism has no place here. We support the black community." Every single window, which can be seen, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, has been smashed. And the ubiquitous ACAB has appeared on the building. Hey, there's a irony for you. Oh, in celebrity idiot news, this is from Hannah Blow at Breitbart. Left-wing comedian and producer Chelsea Handler asked on Wednesday if police officers in America are being given some, quote, some extra incentive for every person of color they kill or permanently paralyze. It seems like it. Welcome to America, unquote. This is the kind of talk that gets people killed. What exactly is Chelsea Handler famous for? Taking her clothes off at every conceivable opportunity in public, and I suppose for sleeping her way to the middle. The "hello privilege, it's me, Chelsea" star's remark follows the eruption of rioting in Minnesota. This is not the first time Handler has made such bold claims, routinely going to bat for radical left-wing causes. She recently joined actress turned activist, another idiot, Alyssa Milano, in calling on the Biden administration to take action on slavery reparations. "We're out of excuses as a country, so please stop making them," Handler pleaded. "We built this country on the back of black and brown people, and we still haven't really done anything. So this is the time. This is the moment." Well, my response would be, you first, Chelsea. You first, Alyssa. Why don't you donate your millions to Black Lives Matter? At the very least, it would mean some of their leaders could buy some more houses. During a conversation with actor-comedian Amy Schumer, is that what she is? I thought she was a tampon salesman. And actor Jamila Jamil, who, as we learn, has had just horrific experiences throughout her life with bees. Bees seem to detest Jamila Jamil, or alternately, she could be making this up. During this conversation, Handler shared her firsthand account of white male privilege and concluded that everyone has to give a little bit away who has too much. Once again, you first, Chelsea. Judge denies George Floyd's friend who sold him drugs will not be forced to testify for Derek Chauvin's defense. Judge rules after denying motion for acquittal. This is from the Daily Mail. On March the 31st, Hall filed a shock motion stating his intention to invoke his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination if called to testify for either side. The motion came hours before the jury heard testimony from Floyd's girlfriend, Courtney Ross, who claimed both she and Floyd were supplied illicit drugs by Hall, who denied that allegation. Under Minnesota law, a person who provides drugs to a person who subsequently dies of an overdose is liable for third-degree murder charges. Standing briefly before the judge on Wednesday, his hair pulled back and smartly dressed in suit and tie, Hall said, "I am fearful of criminal charges going forward because I have open charges not settled yet." Hall's lawyer, State Defender Adrian Cousins, said that for Hall to answer anything would be for him to present himself on a silver platter to the state. Of course, they could always give him immunity if they really wanted to hear what he has to say, but clearly they don't. Apparently, it's irrelevant. The prosecution has made the case that despite Floyd having fentanyl levels 3 times higher than those traditionally associated with a fatal overdose, it's completely irrelevant. Julie Kelly has been following the January 6th riot in Washington, D.C. and its aftermath at American Greatness. She does fine work. While more than 36 people charged with various offenses related to the January 6th protest on Capitol Hill now rot in solitary confinement in a D.C. jail, Joe Biden's Justice Department is letting off the hook violent protesters involved in the ongoing siege of Portland. Politico today reported federal prosecutors are seeking deferred prosecution for at least 6 people charged with disorderly conduct, attacking police officers, and interfering with law enforcement in that city last year. Josh Gerstein wrote April 14th, some lawyers attribute the government's newfound willingness to resolve the Portland protest cases without criminal convictions to the arrival of President Joe Biden's administration in January and to policy and personnel changes at the Justice Department. Some of the assaults described in the Portland cases bear similarities to the Capitol violence. So it appears that not only the city government of Portland, but now the Department of Justice are effectively branch plants of Antifa, Inc. These offenses include assaults on law enforcement with various weapons, including a shield. A few Capitol defendants face multiple charges for use or possession of a deadly weapon, a riot shield inside the building January 6th, and flashing a laser at police aircraft. Offenders also face civil disorder charges similar to the obstruction of an official proceeding charge filed against more than 130 Capitol protesters. Portland protesters, once the quasi-plea arrangement is settled, will come away with a clean record and serve no jail time. But legal observers admit the special treatment poses a stark difference in how Biden's Justice Department is handling its unprecedented manhunt for January 6 perpetrators. There are already signs the Portland deals could create contrasts or anomalies with the Capitol cases, Gerstein wrote. While the Portland defendants now face no jail or criminal conviction in connection with assaulting law enforcement, prosecutors in Washington have sought pretrial detention in virtually all the Capitol riot cases involving alleged assaults on police. Well, they call it a narco-tyranny. Oh, yes, speaking of January the 6th, Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi seem to be in a contest to determine which of them is the most deranged. This is from Catherine Rodriguez at Breitbart. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi claimed the January 6 Capitol rioters would have had a battle on their hands if they messed with her, adding that she is a, quote, street fighter, unquote. That's what they were setting out to do, Pelosi told USA Today. She added if they had reached her, she would not have been someone to mess around with. Well, I'm tough. I'm a street fighter. They would have had a battle on their hands, she continued. Nancy Pelosi is a skinny, quite thin, 79-year-old woman who has grave difficulty in speaking on a regular basis. But no, she's a street fighter. I was expecting, are we going to get some of that, Navy SEALs copy pasta from her? I suspect that someone has already done this already at Reddit or some other place. And back to Tucker Carlson. Someone called David Von Driel at the Washington Post writes, the principal reason that life feels so different today from a generation ago, so overheated, bitter, screeching, and dangerous, is that the business of communication has been flipped on its head. I don't know how old this fellow is. He looks to be in his 40s. I suppose he has no knowledge of what the political climate in the United States was when Lyndon Johnson was president, when you had hundreds of thousands of people gathering together. Hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? When the Weather Underground were bombing places, when there seemed to be a threat of revolution in the United States. And Johnson, I suppose, who was the most reviled American president up to that time, was succeeded by Richard Nixon, who turned out to be even more reviled. A famous American novelist, award-winning novelist named Robert Coover, wrote a book about Richard Nixon in which he sodomizes Uncle Sam. If anyone talks to you about the good old days of civility in American politics, tell them to shut the hell up, because they're ignorant. But Von Driel continues, by business, I mean the money side of the game. Fortunes can now be made from relatively small audiences. And as any metropolitan newspaper owner of the past 15 years can tell you, fortunes can be lost trying to hold on to broad audiences. And then he talks about the Property Brothers for some reason. Okay, and then, Rasputin, who is Roger Ailes. Again, back to the Property Brothers. The son of a reporter and longtime television executive, Richard Carlson, Fox News' star, keenly understands the money side of the business and the power of a passionate niche audience. He broke into TV on a program that epitomized the old model. Crossfire on CNN matched a vaguely liberal host with a vaguely conservative one to hash over issues from between 35-yard lines. Robert Novak and Pat Buchanan were not vaguely conservative. I suppose one thing that's changed in the journalism business is that people are allowed to pen op-eds without knowing anything about the subject. Carlson knew exactly what he was doing last week when he embraced the white replacement theory made infamous by the torch-carrying neo-Nazis of Charlottesville. As prelude, he specifically predicted that doing so would rile up the partisans of Twitter that he let fly. And in the sputtering outrage that followed in response, Carlson heard nothing but the sound of ka-ching, ka-ching. Yes, Tucker Carlson is the first person in the history of the American media to learn that being controversial can be lucrative. Thank you for this, Washington Post, where democracy dies in darkness. The theory that Democrats are importing, and that's in scare quotes, why? Migrants to be obedient voters as a way of disenfranchising citizens who are already here is incongruous in a nation of immigrants. No, the United States, not a nation of immigrants, a nation of colonists, a nation of settlers. People came mostly from the British Isles to America, and it was root, hog, or die. There was no affirmative action. There were no government gibs. Immigration is so far removed from colonization that someone like him should be embarrassed to conflate them. But these people are shameless. It also ignores the fact that new arrivals cannot legally vote. And a fair number of Republicans have sought fervently but in vain for evidence that they illegally vote in appreciable numbers. Hispanic voters actually shifted toward the Republicans in the last election, not away from them. Yes, the Democrats won the Hispanic vote 2-1. Yeah. So let's keep bringing Hispanics in the United States, Republicans will tell you, because what we lose with each individual voter, we gain in volume. But when you're a Rhode Island prep schooler in populist drag, you don't get fussy about making sense. Ooh, prep school, or boo, Carlson is making bank instead. You know, the people who at MSNBC and CNN, they work for free. They consider to be their charitable duty. Yeah. Okay. And, yes, more on this story. This is from James Fulford at VDare. In an old post about leftists being told to draw away the hems of their garments and feign ignorance if hearing a racist remark, I wrote that years ago, someone told me a meta joke about political correctness. You ask someone, did you hear the joke about the American, the Englishman, the Frenchman, and the Mexican? When they answer yes, you say, did you speak out against it? And as Steve Saylor reported here, David Batson of Georgetown was fired for saying, rather than you're a racist, when female colleague Sandra Sellers complained on a Zoom call that her black students always did worse. On Twitter, someone called Hassan Ahmed, very much a heritage American name there, said since folks are trying to defend Professor Batson, one, he had an obligation to call her out on it and report her, and did not. Well, CNN feels that Mark Steyn, co-hosting with Tucker Carlson, is at fault for listening to Tucker talk about the demographic consequences of immigration. Oh, yes. The ADL has honored Ilhan Omar. Yeah. Big friend of the Jews. None bigger. Ilhan Omar, ADL, writes the nation's first Somali-American lawmaker and boxer, Amaya Zafar, who's a woman who fought to wear her hijab in the ring, are just some of the inspiring stories featured in The Good Fight book. I didn't know that about Ilhan Omar and her. I did know that about Ilhan Omar and her brother. Yes, she married her brother in aid of immigration fraud. But Stein is right. The ADL is supporting the immigration that's not only replacing whites, but replacing Jews, not only in former Jewish neighborhoods, but also in the Democratic Party. And Stein, at his website, steinonline.com, discusses the perversion of public discourse. On last Thursday's Fox News primetime, I mentioned a small but telling news item on the latest benefit accorded to illegal aliens. Whenever you fly anywhere in America, you require picture ID, so that when you get to the head of the great endless security line, the TSA agent can get out his jeweler's loupe and explain how the ink and examine how the ink lies on the paper. And when he's finished doing that, he can fish out his UV light to study the watermark on your ID, which is all bollocks, even by the standards of American security state bureaucracy. Why bother going to all of the tedious trouble of fake ID when real ID is so easy to acquire? On September the 11th, 2001, 4 of the terrorists boarded the flight with genuine, valid picture ID issued by the state of Virginia and obtained through the illegal immigrant day workers network run out of the parking lot of the 7-Eleven in Falls Church. If that didn't get Americans mad about the cosseting of the undocumented, I doubt they'll care a fig about this latest privilege. But I thought it worth mentioning anyway. While you're stuck with the loop and light guy poring over your ID, the federal government announced that week that migrants crossing the southern border will be permitted to fly within the United States without any valid ID. You're on orange alert now and forever. They're in the express checking. It would seem that the government of the United States is daring its citizens to revolt, because one hears something like this almost every day. Oh, black people are being denied the right to vote. Why? Oh, because they don't have ID. Well, of course they have ID, because if you don't have ID in America, there's hardly anything that you can do. Oh, but all the airlines require ID, so I guess black people in the United States never get on airplanes. But illegal immigrants, you don't need ID, because, we don't need to know anything about you. Why would we need to know anything about you? And of course, we want you distributed all over the country. No, I really believe that the government of the United States is looking for people to lash out against anarcho-tyranny, to use an excuse to institute, a dictatorship. honestly, and to permanently discredit any opposition as terrorists. CNN would later tut Stein did not object to Carlson's comments. Stein comments, "No, I didn't, because I agreed with almost every word. But even if I hadn't, I'd still have let him say it, because as a general principle, I'm philosophically opposed to narrowing the bounds of public discourse on any topic. And in the case of mass illegal immigration, they've been narrowed to the point where there is virtually no language with which it is permitted to discuss this subject honestly." Yes, and he has some fun with Jonathan Greenblatt. And let's go to a story from the Jerusalem Post. 1,500 rabbis blast the Anti-Defamation League for calling Fox News to fire Tucker Carlson. In response to the ADL's call on Fox News to fire host Tucker Carlson, the Coalition for Jewish Values wrote a letter Tuesday calling out the organization for its grossly misplaced charges of anti-Semitism. The letter was supported by 1,500 traditional Orthodox rabbis who informed ADL CEO Jonathan Greenblatt that, alas, the ADL has become markedly partisan under your leadership. The ADL had called for Carlson to be fired because in a segment on the right-wing cable news network last week, I wonder if the Jerusalem Post, do they describe CNN and MSNBC as left-wing cable news channels? Carlson endorsed the idea that there is a coordinated campaign to replace the population of the United States with immigrants from the third world. Yes, when the president of the United States pretty much says the borders are open, come on down to America and get your affirmative action and get your Gibbs. You don't need ID. This is in no way a conspiracy, though, to replace Americans. No, that would be absurd. The CJV's letter mentioned that the ADL's focus on these right-wing neo-Nazis as the core source of anti-Semitism neglects radical Islam and the Democrat and college progressive movements, which are just as dangerous. The letter additionally attacked ADL for lending credibility to American civil rights activist and host of MSNBC, Al Sharpton. And I'll remind you that Al Sharpton fomented 2 honest-to-God pogroms in New York City. The CJV, the Coalition for Jewish Values, called for an ADL reform, hoping it would return to its 1913 mission of fighting anti-Semitism without any partisan preoccupations. I've mentioned before this documentary by an Israeli filmmaker called Defamation, which is absolutely fascinating. He goes to the United States, and he's heard that apparently anti-Semitism is out of control in the United States, so he visits Abe Foxman at the ADL. Well, tell me about this anti-Semitism, this ocean, this huge wave of anti-Semitism. Well, Abe Foxman says, sure, let's go through the files. Employee denied day off for Jewish religious holiday. Employee denied day off for Jewish religious holiday. There were a couple of other incidents, but it was mostly employees not being given the day off for a Jewish religious holiday. And that's pretty close to Hitler, wouldn't you say? Now, oh, yes, back to BLM. This is from Steve Watson at Summit News. Black Lives Matter issued a statement Tuesday asserting that any accusations of wrongdoing against co-founder Patrice Khan-Cullors misusing funds are yet another example of, wait for it, white supremacy. As details continue to emerge of the property spending splurge that the self-proclaimed Marxist activist has been on, as well as details of yet more grifting activities, and even as other leaders call for investigation, the organization claimed that the whole thing is a false and dangerous story being pushed by right-wing forces and white supremacists. Race into the issue again. According to the statement, Patrice Cullors is the executive director of Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation, BLMGNF. She serves in the role in a volunteer capacity and does not receive a salary or benefits. What does she live on then? Where did the money come from? for this woman to buy 3 properties worth, $4 million? Hmm? Where did the money come? I'm assuming, gifts. It must be something like that. Oh, she doesn't receive a salary. But what about this person's spouse? Hmm? Well, the spouse is Janaya Khan, a social activist from Toronto, co-founder of Black Lives Matter Toronto, as well as an international ambassador for the Black Lives Matter network. Khan identifies as Black, queer, and gender nonconforming. I don't think that this person, and I don't know what sex this person is going to have $4 million lying around to buy 3 properties in the United States of America. Yes, apparently in America, white people are given free rein to wander the streets, killing every Black person that they see. The truth, of course, is, it's not that. According to Ken Gividan at VDare, I found 25 instances of interracial violence resulting in the deaths of 35 victims reported in the calendar month of March 2021. All but 2 of the victims were white, and only one of the killers was white. Victims include the elderly, children, white female significant others, this is definitely a thing, law enforcement officers, and totally random passerby. Among interracial suspected and known homicides reported in March 2021, the most spectacular actually was an immigrant mass murder. An Arab Muslim immigrant allegedly massacred 10 people, all of whom were white, in Boulder, Colorado. And I'm looking at pictures of these 10, and yes, they are definitely white. That at least made the national news, not so my other finds. Ryan Kane Decker, age 46, fatally shot in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Chaz E. Stubblefield, 33, of Minneapolis, was charged Friday in Hennepin County District Court with second-degree intentional murder, according to the Star Tribune. Reports say the 2 brushed against each other as the victim was leaving a store. The suspect apparently took offense and, after a brief verbal exchange, allegedly shot the victim. Yeah, well, the lesson there is don't get into a verbal exchange. Run like hell. And yes, he goes into all of the details, but no, as usual, what you're being told is the very opposite of the truth. In America, it is not Black people who are frightened of white people. It is white people who are frightened of Black people, and not just because of the risk, not just because of physical risk, but because of the risk of being called a racist or a white supremacist, which is career ending. A story from CNBC, the Fed, that is to say, the Federal Reserve System, is overwhelmingly white and male and needs to change, a Brookings Institution report released Tuesday say. So what do we expect to believe? That, I don't know, that women and BIPOC, that they're going to, we have to look at money in a completely different way. Actually, they may actually say that. So I shouldn't mock it. Bernie Madoff, mastermind of the nation's biggest investment fraud, dies at 82. I saw that Matt Dredge said that he was in hell. He was a devil or something. Look, if someone comes to you and says that he can guarantee you 25% return on investment every year, you are obviously dealing with a crook. And if you don't, if you don't understand that, and if you don't walk away, you're either stupid or you're willing to participate in, obviously, what is a scam, what is a crime. You know what else is racist? Milk. I don't know, not just because it's white. Extinction Rebellion's Brighton chief has warned the council. Brighton is like the Brooklyn of England now, has warned the council that giving children too much dairy is racist because it discriminates against Black and ethnic minority groups who are much more likely to be lactose intolerant. Alison Plowmer from XR has launched a petition on Brighton and Hove City Council website for 2 plant-based days at state-run schools as soon as possible. The social sciences lecturer and former Green Party employee is also demanding more council-run events to be vegan once the pandemic is over, and it has been signed by 250 people. Well, as I like to say, no one who works for a living has ever voted for the Green Party, and the rise of Green parties across the West is one of the surest indications that we have of a decadence. Oh, shock allegations surrounding the Australian soap opera Neighbours. The Neighbours cast walks to set as they prepared to film scenes in Melbourne amid shocking allegations of racism and abuse on the long-running show. Well, this is quite obviously a shakedown, isn't it? And we're going to be seeing a lot of these shakedowns. Everyone who complains is going to be paid off. Disturbing story from the Daily Mail. Adam Schrader, a teacher at a high school in Oklahoma, has been placed on administrative leave after she was seen using the N-word in a tense standoff with a black student on Friday. The incident at Holdenville High School has gone viral after it was posted on Facebook, with social media users identifying the teacher as Diane Bennett. Has the student been identified? And if not, why not? So what happened here? At the start of the video, the student is seen wearing the hood from his sweatshirt over his head as he paces back and forth while talking to someone on the phone. Because, that's what you do in a classroom. I'm going to walk home, the student says in the video, while telling the person on the other end of the line that the teacher had been yelling at him. He may not be home soon, the teacher says, before telling him that she would be keeping him at the school. The student then calls the teacher a bitch before telling her to watch her tongue as he tries to push through her to get out of the classroom. The teacher then physically tries to stop the student from leaving, grabbing him by the shoulders and pulling on his backpack, while students sit on top of desks recording the standoff. You better watch the fuck out, the student tells the teacher. The teacher warns him, "Don't you hit me," and directs him to stand at a distance away from her. After breaking free, the student says, "Watch where you touch me, I'll knock your ass out." The teacher then tells the student that she will visit him in juvie. "You better be watching who you touchin', N-word." The student tells the teacher. The teacher then says, "You better get home then, N-word." Other students were heard gasping after the teacher used the racial expletive. One white student in the background covers his mouth with his hands because it's a magic word, which means something completely different when different people say it. It's a friendly word when black people say it, even in a hostile situation when directed at a teacher. You may have seen this meme. Why do black people in the United States call each other Monica? I thought that was pretty funny. And I saw an angry response to it. That's not what they're saying. I just, if this fellow wants to leave, why not let him leave? Any of these people who want to leave, why not let them leave? But again, the message is, if you are a white teacher, do not attempt to enforce discipline when there are black students involved, because it's more than your job's worth. And you see this school seems to have thrown this woman under the bus. And it could be more than your life's worth. So just don't get involved in situations like that. I had earlier promised that I was going to begin my discussion of Hilaire Belloc's The Servile State, a book which was first published in 1912, and I will do so today with Belloc's short section, the subject of this book. This book is written to maintain and prove the following truth: that our free modern society, in which the means of production are owned by a few, being necessarily in unstable equilibrium, it is tending to reach a condition of stable equilibrium by the establishment of compulsory labor, legally enforceable upon those who do not own the means of production for the advantage of those who do. With this principle of compulsion applied against the non-owners, there must also come a difference in their status. And in the eyes of society and of its positive law, men will be divided into two sets. The first, economically free and politically free, possessed of the means of production and securely confirmed in that possession. The second, economically unfree and politically unfree, but at first secured by their very lack of freedom in certain necessities of life and in a minimum of well-being beneath which they shall not fall. Society, having reached such a condition, would be released from its present internal strains and would have taken on a form which would be stable, that is capable of being indefinitely prolonged without change. In it would be resolved the various factors of instability which increasingly disturb that form of society called capitalist, and men would be satisfied to accept and to continue in such a settlement. To such a stable society I shall give, for reasons which will be described in the next section, the title of the servile state. I shall not undertake to judge whether this approaching organization of our modern society be good or evil. I shall concern myself only with showing the necessary tendency towards it, which has long existed, and the recent social provisions which show that it has actually begun. This new state will be acceptable to those who desire consciously or by implication the reestablishment among us of a difference of status between possessor and non-possessor. It will be distasteful to those who regard such a distinction with ill favor or even with dread. My business will not be to enter into the discussion between these two types of modern thinkers, but to point out to each and to both that which the one favors and the other would fly upon is them. I shall prove my thesis in particular from the case of the Industrial Society of Great Britain, including that small, alien, and exceptional corner of Ireland which suffers or enjoys industrial conditions today. I shall divide the matter thus. 1, I shall lay down certain definitions. 2, I shall describe the institution of slavery and the servile state of which it is the basis, as these were in the ancient world. I shall then, 3, sketch very briefly the process whereby that age-long institution of slavery was slowly dissolved during the Christian centuries, and whereby the resulting medieval system, based upon highly divided property in the means of production, was 4, wrecked in certain areas of Europe as it approached completion, and had substituted for it in practice, though not in legal theory, a society based on capitalism. 5, next I shall show how capitalism was of its nature unstable, because its social realities were in conflict with all existing or possible systems of law, and because its effects in denying sufficiency and security were intolerable to men. How being thus unstable, it consequently presented a problem which demanded a solution, to wit, the establishment of some stable form of society whose law and social practice should correspond, and whose economic results, by providing sufficiency and security, should be tolerable to human nature. 6, I shall next present the only 3 possible solutions. A, collectivism, or the placing of the means of production in the hands of the political officers of the community. B, property, or the reestablishment of the distributive state in which the mass of citizens should severally own the means of production. Or C, slavery, or a servile state in which those who do not own the means of production shall be legally compelled to work for those who do, and shall receive in exchange a security of livelihood. Now, seeing the distaste with which the remains of our long Christian tradition has bred in us for directly advocating the third solution, and boldly supporting the reestablishment of slavery, the first 2 alone are open to reformers. A reaction towards a condition of well-divided property or the distributive state, or an attempt to achieve the ideal collectivist state. It can be easily shown that this second solution appeals most naturally and easily to a society already capitalist on account of the difficulty with which such a society has to discover the energy, the will, and the vision requisite for the first solution. I shall next proceed to show how the pursuit of this ideal collectivist state, which is bred of capitalism, leads men acting upon a capitalist society not towards the collectivist state, nor anything like it, but to that third, utterly different thing, the servile state. To this 8th section, I shall add an appendix showing how the attempt to achieve collectivism gradually by public purchase is based upon an illusion. Recognizing that theoretical argument of this kind, though intellectually convincing, is not sufficient, To the establishment of my thesis, I shall conclude by giving examples from modern English legislation, which examples prove that the servile state is actually upon us, such as the scheme I designed for this book. And tomorrow, I will get back to Hilaire Belloc's The Servile State with a discussion of his definitions. Yes, has World War III started yet? From Chris Pleasance at the Daily Mail, Ukraine claims Putin is preparing to deploy nuclear weapons to Crimea. If that clown, professional comedian, who's supposedly in charge of the Ukraine, had any brains, he would not be talking about nuclear weapons. But perhaps his American paymasters told him that he must. As tensions ratchet up further and Russia holds live fire drills in the Black Sea ahead of the arrival of the first U.S. warship into the region. The Russian Navy is holding snap live fire drills in the Black Sea today amid escalating tensions around Ukraine. Missile ships, frigate, and minesweepers took part in a drill with naval airplanes and helicopters, Russia said. Ukraine's defense minister accused Russia of preparing to store nuclear weapons in Crimea. This comes as the first of two U.S. destroyers thought to be on the way to the Black Sea is expected to arrive today. Meanwhile, the Kremlin said it is studying Joe Biden's proposal for a summit with Putin, but has not yet accepted. Pro-Kremlin mouthpiece Margarita Simonyan warned that war between the superpowers is inevitable. I'm not so sure. I'm really not so sure. It'd just be insane for the United States to provoke a war with the Ukraine. But look who is in charge there. The neoconservatives were on the outs for 4 years, and one of their major complaints with Donald Trump, perhaps the major complaint, was that he didn't start any wars and that he wasn't killing enough foreigners. This is from RT. Russian troops on Ukraine border ready to defend country in event of war, says Defense Minister Shoigu, warning of NATO buildup. And I'm looking at a picture of Sergei Shoigu. He looks like a very serious man indeed. And you may have seen the comparisons of various defense ministers around the world, particularly, Poland, Russia, versus the women who run these agencies in European, Scandinavian countries. Pretty amusing. The Secretary of Defense is, yes, it's Lloyd J. Austin III, whose being appointed to this was quite controversial. It's supposed to be civilians who run the Department of Defense. 2 detachments of the Russian army, along with 3 airborne units, are ready to act in the event tensions with the West escalated to full-blown fighting, Moscow announced Tuesday following a surprise inspection of troops. After paying a visit to the soldiers, the defense minister told journalists that the personnel met the standards required for the situation. The troops have showed full readiness and ability to fulfill the tasks of ensuring the country's military security. He would say that, but I don't think that the Russian military has the same obsession with frivolity and with the continuing revolution that the American military has demonstrated. The Marines just introduced their new maternity uniforms. The United States Marine Corps, yes, just introduced its new maternity uniforms. Matthew Iglesias tweets, I don't think I've ever had a serious effort from a hawkish think tank or a retired general to offer clear explanation of why 20 years of U.S. training and equipment support wasn't enough to create an Afghan government that can fight the Taliban to a stalemate. I don't know that I could be described as hawkish, but I'll attempt to help Matty Iglesias out. Afghanistan is not really a country in which we understand countries to be. There is a famous saying in the Muslim world about loyalty. I against my brothers, I and my brothers against my cousins, I and my brothers and my cousins against the world. Yes, loyalty is considered, is much more closely held in Afghanistan than it is in the West. And here's another reason why. The attempts, the outrageously expensive attempts by America, Canada, Britain to train troops have not worked, because they will sell themselves out to the highest bidder, and they will later sell themselves out again to someone else for $1 more. The makeup of Afghanistan can only be estimated, but it's 48% Pashtun, 22% Tajik, 9% Hazara, 9% Uzbek, and other lesser tribes. To put it mildly, these groups all hate each other. Also, as we've seen in a hilarious documentary I saw about British attempts to train soldiers to fight the Taliban, they all get high on khat in the afternoon, and hilariously, when there is ever any action, they start wailing in terror, dump their rifles, and run like hell from the site of battle. So that's my attempt to explain to Maddie Iglesias why this hasn't worked. Speaking of frivolity in the military, it's from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. The Australian military has been reminded by MPs that its core mission is the application of lethal violence in response to concerns about it being too woke, following a performance during which scantily clad dancers twerked on a Navy ship. I've seen the video, and I'm thinking, are these naval personnel? And I'm rather inclined to suspect that they are, because the choreography was crummy, and the implementation of the choreography was crummy too. But these women did get to dance around wearing almost nothing, and they did get to twerk in front of whom? Well, the advisory came after awkward scenes where young women gyrated suggestively in front of military officials, some of them elderly, during a ceremony to formally commission the Navy's newest ship, a debacle that was dubbed a shit show by one member of the government. We're meant to be a fighting force, he added, echoing comments by backbencher Philip Thompson, who argued that the Australian Defence Force had lurched too far to the left with its focus on social justice issues. Our ADF shouldn't be left or right. They should be straight down the middle of what their job is. And their job is to defend our nation, our interests, our values, our sovereignty, but also when we go on operations, have an unapologetic aggression and violence to get the mission done. And I want to take a look at these women, and I'm not seeing any black women. And I think that's the reason why that these Australian politicians were emboldened to criticize this disgusting display. Because if there had been even one black woman involved, of course, this would have been racist. And another example of the ubiquitous white supremacy. Yes, and Kamala Harris is on the move. According to the Daily Mail, there was a lot of talk that she was supposed to be the border czar. Why hadn't she gone to the border? She doesn't live that far away. She's not going to the border still. She is going to visit Guatemala and Mexico to address root causes of the crisis. The root causes. Poor countries, or Mexico's not that poor, actually, by world standards. You get to Central America, poor countries, richest country on earth. And it gives you free stuff if you show up. Plus, you get legal advantages over white people. Yes, you get affirmative action. Sounds like a pretty good deal. Your hospital care is free. And, all manner of welfare. But Kamala Harris doesn't seem to understand this. According to Charlie Spearing in Breitbart, Vice President Kamala Harris referenced the television show Cheers to explain the migrant crisis on Wednesday. She explained that most people in Central American countries do not want to leave their homes where they are familiar with their language and culture. You know, to use a phrase from an old television show, Cheers, you know, where everybody knows your name, she said, reciting words from the show's theme song. She explained, most people don't want to leave home. Really? Is that even true in the United States of America? Kamala Harris's parents, neither of them are American. One came from India and one came from Jamaica. And they went to California. And they both left. But, you know, Americans don't like to leave home. Apparently, I'm reminded of Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House of Representatives, who was once asked where he came from, and he acknowledged his rootlessness when he replied, nowhere. And there are many Americans and many Canadians who could say exactly the same. Harris argued that migrants to the United States are motivated to leave their home countries because they are afraid of physical harm. Yeah, that's what they say, or are unable to meet their economic needs, which is a phrase which means nothing. This is one part of what informs my perspective on this issue of addressing the root causes. She wanted to inspire hope for the citizens of countries such as Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. The Vice President talked about meeting the challenges of the severe climate experiences in the region and tackling violence and corruption. What is she talking about? Hurricanes, earthquakes, torrential rain, severe climate experiences. Does it get too hot there? Pretty close to the equator. I don't know that there's anything that even Kamala Harris can do about the problems of countries that are too close to the equator, but I happen to really care a lot about water policy, she said. Wow, there are so many bows in this woman's quiver. She said, promising to explore ideas of how to help the region on issues of irrigation and agriculture. She also wants to work through the United Nations to internationalize the crisis and get American allies involved in the region. Yeah, that's what America's allies want to do, is to stick their snout into Central America. Yeah. Okay. Water policy. Too funny. Tennessee Coates, who a few years ago we were told was the greatest writer in America, and he's kind of dropped off the map. He got into some sort of slap fight with a black academic and came out looking, well, stupid. He writes comic books now. According to the Guardian, Jordan Peterson shocked by Captain America villain Red Skull espousing 10 rules for life. In the new issue of Captain America, the superhero's longtime nemesis Red Stripe espouses his views about 10 rules for life, the feminist trap, and chaos and order, and Canadian psychologist Jordan Peterson is none too pleased. Written by the award-winning author Tennessee Coates, the Marvel comic features a version of the villain who looks to radicalize young men by telling them, quote, what they've always longed to hear, that they're secretly great. What's wrong with that? That the whole world is against them. Largely true. That if they're men, they'll fight back. Well, we hope so. And bingo, that's their purpose. That's what they'll live for, and that's what they'll die for. Boy, this Red Stripe fellow, he sounds pure evil. Peterson tweeted, do I really live in a universe where Tennessee Coates has written a Captain America comic featuring a parody of my ideas as part of the philosophy of the arch-villain Red Skull? Well, yeah. Tennessee Coates won the National Book Award for Between the World and Me, which is a very touching story about how his child refused to get off an escalator, which led to some unpleasantness with a white woman, apparently an event which formed Tennessee Coates' entire Weltanschauung. He was awarded a MacArthur Genius Grant in 2015. The MacArthur Genius Grant is rather like being a Rhodes Scholar. They're just a bunch of bad hats, exclusively bad hats. Coates has also written for the Black Panther comic series and is writing a forthcoming Superman film. Is Superman going to fight white supremacism? The world just doesn't have enough Superman films. And finally, again from the Daily Mail, by Snejana Tharbarov, Tiger Mom professor Amy Chua denies wrongdoing after she's suspended from teaching Yale law students for hosting alcohol-fueled student dinner parties. Chua, 58, who's also the author of the book World on Fire, which I highly commend to you. It's about market-dominant minorities and the envy and hatred that they foment around the world. She was sidelined from leading a small group, an informal group of students, over allegations of misconduct. Yale Daily News published a story saying that several students accused Chua of hosting dinner parties for students and drinking with them. Chua's conduct purportedly violated a 2019 agreement with Yale Law School, under which she promised to cease socializing with students. Chua's husband, Yale law professor Jed Rubenfeld, is serving a 2-year suspension from teaching over claims of sexual harassment. Is it going to take 2 years for Yale to discover whether there is any merit to these claims, or has he been suspended merely because the claims were made? It certainly sounds like the latter. Chua wrote an open letter to the entire Yale Law School faculty Thursday, denying the claims and contending that she is being punished over false allegations from a small group of students who oppose her controversial opinions. Chua wrote an op-ed before sexual assault allegations emerged against U.S. Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, describing him as a mentor for young lawyers, particularly women. Well, there we have it. Her eldest daughter, Yale Law graduate Sophia Chua Rubenfeld, clerked for Kavanaugh. Quite a cute young woman, I must say. Chua and her husband were both previously accused of telling young law students how to dress if clerking for him. There's something objectionable about that. Chua was also accused of telling young students that Kavanaugh preferred attractive clerks. He denied the claims. Yes, controversial opinion. I like good-looking people more than non-good-looking people. Can you imagine? Okay, this is what I take from this story. That university students are now creeps, tattletales, and worse. Best not to have anything to do with them outside of the classroom, and probably best to limit your interaction with them inside the classroom. That just, read from the text or whatever, and give one-syllable answers to any questions, or claim that you don't know. I was first shocked when I learned back in the 1970s that professors, whether they get tenure, to give one example, whether they continue to be employed by universities, that this depends on the amount of or the lack of anonymous denunciations from students. I could hardly believe this, but this has been going on for a long time. Amy Chua claims in her letter that she was rather pressured into teaching this small group when someone else backed out. And as I rack my brain to try to imagine what dinner parties with students they could possibly be referring to, I can only think of a few possibilities, all of which I not only stand by, but I'm proud of. As many of you know, there are a number of serious crises for our students in the last few months, including a student sending racist and terrifying violent messages to other students and then disappearing, accusations of racism at the Law Journal, and most recently an outburst of anti-Asian violence that's been in the news. In the midst of these events, a few students in extreme distress reached out to me, feeling that they had no one else to turn to, many of them feeling that the law school administration was not supporting them. Well, I can just see dozens of ways in which this could go wrong. That you go to advice from a professor and the student is ungrateful or misconstrues the advice or feels ashamed at having gone to someone else to deal with his or her own problems. Yes, my advice would be just don't do it. There you could say quite reasonably, you have student counselors, do you not? One on every floor, something like that. Go and talk to that person. Don't talk to me. That's not my job. Let's have a look at the chat. Lots of Tajiks in Uzbekistan as well, says Hikmah Warrior. Buddy says Syrian Lebanese that came to the USA in late 1800s, early 1900s made every effort to assimilate. They had to. Well, yes, they had to, because it was root, hog, or die. There was no Walmarts and McDonald's there where those companies openly state, no, we're not going to pay you a living wage because we'd have to accept less profits. Here are a bunch of brochures on how you can get Uncle Sucker to make up the difference between what we're paying you and what we should be paying you. Media Hit says Guide to Culture is having his film festival now. I'm only listening to the ones co-hosted by Tai E from the Soiled Cinema blog. I've been following long before hanging in this part of the internet. Buddy says, I have a portion of assimilated Middle Eastern heritage. Same situation as Ralph Nader, Danny Thomas, Casey Kasem, etc. Danny Thomas was a great American who founded St. Jude's Hospital, which you may have seen on TV. He was a struggling comedian, and he made a prayer to St. Jude, the patron saint of lost causes, that if he ever made it as a comedian, he would do his best to pay back America for his good fortune. So he established a hospital with the best medical treatment for poor people. They are not charged for this, and they are accommodated. As I say, Danny Thomas was a great American. Justin Proto says even Iran has strategies, fast, small ships that will maneuver a destroyer, let alone a carrier. Ogun Zion says Chua and husband are Steven Pinker liberals, and those are getting cleared out. Yeah, World on Fire is based, says Palcasso 88. Yes, she states right near the beginning, family, the Chinese diaspora. It's in the Philippines, it's in Indonesia, it's in Vietnam, it's all over the place. And family overheard the living in Manila, the Filipina servants saying that if they had the chance, they would gleefully slit the throats of their employers because they were Chinese. Yes. The people of the world all hate each other. I learned that when I worked at the University of British Columbia, which was sort of a mini United Nations. And I had this naive liberal belief, apparently it's only white people who hate different people. And then I discovered that they all hate each other. And the intensity of this hatred is far greater than white people, as a rule, are capable of evincing. Military is a jobs program at this point, says Justin Proto. Yeah. Yes, it is. And let's see. We're talking about Tatar music. Okay. Media Hit says even Italian, Spanish films made in Asian countries are interesting to watch. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Tomorrow is Theater Thursday, and I am going to be discussing Adam Curtis's multi-segment documentary from this year, Can't Get You Out of My Head. The week after that, I'm going to be discussing Bong Joon-ho's Oscar-winning Best Picture, Parasite from 2019. April 29th, I'm going to be discussing Rainer Werner Fassbinder's 1980 serial from the classic novel Berlin Alexanderplatz. And May the 6th, an American movie from 1999. I've been neglecting them, Doug Liman's Go. And on May the 13th, a absolutely crazy Japanese movie from 1977 called House. On the book club, this Friday, I'm going to be discussing a book that's turned out to be excellent, actually. published this year by written by Stephen Sukup. It's called "The Dictatorship of Woke Capital: How Political Correctness Captured Big Business." The week after that, I'm going to be discussing Andy Ngo's book on Antifa called Unmasked on April the 30th, a novel about the plight of men in China by Maggie Shen King called In Excess Mail. On May the 7th, Tom Holland's latest volume on Roman history called Dynasty. And on May the 14th, Cultured Grugs by John Chapman. And coming up on Music Monday, April the 19th, Classical Crossover, Threat or Menace. April 26th, A Guide to Collecting Classical Music. May 3rd, I'm going to be looking at K-pop, The Uncanny Valley. And on May the 10th, I'm going to be discussing the legendary cult figure and founder, lead guitarist, songwriter, and vocalist of Pink Floyd, Syd Barrett. So I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show, any part of it, I would appreciate it if you would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which would be highly appreciated in this very uncertain time in my life, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, a donation to this live stream can be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.